I'm Jack Guralnik from the National Institute on Aging, and I am here to give you some tips about some of the performance tasks that you'll be doing. I think you've been well trained in these tasks, but there are always a number of things that come up, questions that people have, advice that we can give on how to do them better, how to deal with out of the ordinary kinds of responses. So I'll spend some time going through the balance, the walk, and the chair rise tasks in that order, and go into some detail about some of the aspects of them. Let me just start giving a little bit of background related to performance testing. I do work in aging research, gerontologic research, and for many years we've been interested in disability in older people. For those of you who have older friends, family members, you know how important it is to maintain functioning. Older people's, an important goal for them is to remain independent, to not lose their ability to function independently. And so this is an area that we have studied for quite a long time. Generally, disability was studied through self-report questions, and you're asking many of these questions in the NHATs related to self-care activities, other daily activities, mobility. But in recent years, we've moved into the area of performance testing. And this is not to replace the self-report. If we really want to know if someone is able to go shopping, it's impractical to set up a test store and have them do that while we observe them. We ask them about it. But some of these assessments that we do on walking and rising from a chair are very valuable because they do these tests in a very standardized way, not in the person's own home or in their own environment, but in a standardized kind of environment. Even though we are doing the testing in their home, we're doing it the same way for everybody. And that's why we've gone through this fairly rigorous training to really standardize it so everybody's doing the same test. So we first started using these measures quite a while ago in a study that was done in 1988 and developed this battery that we now call the Short Physical Performance Battery. And the components of that battery are included in the NHATs. And in our research, we then followed people who were administered this battery and found that it was a very powerful predictor of many different kinds of outcomes. For instance, mortality. We saw that people who had higher performance had lower mortality, and that there was a graded response, so that as performance got worse and worse, we saw higher mortality rates as we followed people. We also saw that the performance assessments were related to hospitalization, healthcare costs, admission to nursing homes, and perhaps most importantly, in people who were not yet disabled, these kinds of tests are very good at predicting who is at risk of becoming disabled down the line, 1 year later, 4 years later. So a very powerful way of identifying people at risk who we might consider intervening upon to help them try to prevent becoming disabled. So these are very important tests, and because they're standardized, they're very good at comparing across populations. The Short Physical Performance Battery has now been done in a national study in England. It's been done in many other countries. Just recently, I got a translation of it in Chinese, so they're using it in China. So it's starting to have very broad use, and because it's standardized in the way that it is, we'll be able to compare people across different cultures, different ethnic groups, different countries. So with that brief introduction, let me go through some of these items and try to give you some input into questions that may come up. So if we start with the balance, and you can follow through with me in the booklet. We've talked a lot about doing the demos and how to best fit them in. And it is a little bit awkward when you've got both the language you've got to use and you've got to do the demo. And so you'll work out the way that's most comfortable for you. It has to work so that people are hearing and seeing at the same time. What I suggest, for instance, when you go to the side-by-side stand, we'll take that as the example, although all the stands are similar, that it's probably best to read the beginning part right from the book. Now I'll show you the first movement. I want you to try to stand with your feet together side by side for about 10 seconds. I think it's fine to read that. What I'm going to ask you to try to do is to memorize the next two sentences, which are, you may use your arms, bend your knees, or move your body in order to keep your balance, but try not to move your feet. Try to hold this position until I tell you to stop. It's a bit to memorize, but if you can get it, then you can be doing the demo at the same time that you're giving those commands. And what we always suggest to people is that they really overemphasize these movements. People sometimes they may hear it and they may kind of see you doing it a little bit, but we don't want people standing rigid straight up doing the balance test. We want people to use their arms and bend their knees and move their body. So almost in an overemphasized way, you say you may use your arms, bend your knees, or move your body to maintain your balance, but try not to move your feet. Try to hold this position until I tell you to stop. And I think if you're saying that and doing it in this kind of overemphasized way, people will really get the idea that they don't have to stand there rigidly while they're doing the test. I have seen people kind of get people in position and start to hold them, and then they realize their stopwatch is not reset, and they're working at that, and meanwhile the person's standing there, sometimes in the tandem position, which is not very stable, and it's not good. So just reset your stopwatch. I think the good habit to get into is after you've recorded the time for one stand, just automatically set it to 0 so it's ready to go for the next stand. Okay, moving down that page a little further, after you've said, "Are you ready?" and they say, "Yes." Sometimes people will just nod their head, so you're watching them, and it should be obvious when they acknowledge the fact that they're ready, either by saying it or nodding their head. Then you're going to want to start the test. We want to say ready so people know that you're going to be ready to start the test. But the real test begins when you say begin. So you usually would say ready, begin, in a very clear way. And at that time, 3 things need to happen simultaneously. You need to start the stopwatch. You need to remove your hand from their arm. And you need to take a half a step back. So just get into the habit of doing all 3 of those things simultaneously. Now in most of the demos we saw today, and when you're practicing with each other, people have been pretty successful in doing these tests. When the thing that's challenging, and then if you get the time to practice with each other before you go, you shouldn't be doing as well as you're doing. You should play frail 90-year-old people that are more difficult to spot, and also who fail these tests, because it's a little bit hard when someone loses their balance and you're worried about their safety to remember to click that stopwatch. But you have to get into the habit of just naturally, when someone is starting to lose their balance and take a step, get that stopwatch clicked. And you can do that when you get into that habit at the same time you're stabilizing them. Most people, when they fail the test, even fairly frail people, don't fall down. They just take a step. But you want to be there to make sure when they take that step that they don't trip and they don't get into trouble. Now, what I didn't mention when I talked about the history of doing these tests, is that we've really had a lot of experience now. I myself have not done 1,000 of these, but I've been involved in studies where they were done on large numbers of people. And we've probably, Kushang and I were trying to estimate this. This test has probably been done 15 to 20,000 times all over the world. And I have not heard of a serious adverse event that's come from doing this test. And mainly it's because if people do it according to instructions, it's very safe. And while there may be some minor issues, no one has really gotten hurt doing this test that I know of. Someone could potentially fall. We don't expect this to happen, especially if you're conservative about not doing the test in unstable people. If someone should fall, you should not try to pick them up by yourself without getting some help. If they're on the floor, you should bring a chair over. The first thing you do is, if people seem to be okay, is to get them to their hands and knees, and then bring a chair over and put the chair so that they can then put their hands on the chair, and then slowly bring themselves up to the chair while you're helping them. So be conservative in how you handle any kind of fall in helping the person get back up. Now, there's the issue in all of these tests, particularly the stands and the chair rise test, of the not attempted category. And this is one that really takes some careful attention on your part, because when someone truly can't do a test, that's very meaningful information if they're unable to do it. It's very different than someone that says, I just don't want to participate in this. I really don't want to do it, which is a refusal. The refusals, once people start doing these, are very rare. We don't see them very often. Sometimes people may refuse the whole battery, but once people get going, they usually enjoy doing these. They see they're not so intimidating. But there will be occasionally people who refuse. Sometimes people who are worried about their ability to do the tests, who are quite unstable, they'll refuse, but in fact, as you've gotten to know them, if you see they're really shaky and unstable, it's not just they're refusing, it's that they're really unsure of themselves and they're feeling unsafe. And so in that case, if you agree with that, even if they won't admit they're unsafe, if you think they're unsafe, it's better to check that the participant is unsafe and you don't want to do it, because that indicates to us that they're really not functioning very well, as opposed to someone who's perfectly well, who just doesn't have the time of day to do this and doesn't want to participate. And when you're out in the field, this is a distinction that really is on your shoulders. You have to make that. And sometimes it's a fairly fine line. And I can't tell you exactly how to do it every time. But do be aware that sometimes people will say, I don't want to do this. And it is because they feel unsafe. So you can try to draw them out a little more about why they don't want to do it. We like to try to stabilize everybody, but there clearly are people who just want to be left alone, especially the side-by-side stand. People are getting into it before you've even demonstrated it. And so you should come up to them in the normal position, and if they're already in position and they're ready, you can say, ready, begin. But as Dr. Patel emphasized yesterday, there are sometimes people who they look pretty stable on the side-by-side, pretty good on the semi-tandem, but then they get real shaky on the full tandem. So if you get into the habit of just being there, even just slightly touching their elbow, because that's kind of how you tell them that you're starting to do the timing. You say, ready, begin, and then they feel you let go. So they have both kinds of sensory input. They're hearing it, they're feeling it. It's a good, clear start to the balance test. So I would push it a little bit and at least hold on to the elbow and say, this is part of the test. And if they are pushing you away, then you can back off a little bit. But you should kind of just get into that habit of doing it each time. Now, the other issue came up of positioning and where should you be during the balance test. And maybe we should do a little demo. I think there's always some discussion about this, but I found that the best place to be is not so much right on the side, but a little bit back. So that if he's looking, if you think of this as a clock and Kuzhang is looking straight at 12, I'm somewhere between 7 and 8 o'clock over here. So I'm not at 9 o'clock. I'm a little further back. And this way, you have a little better access to this side of him. He should fall that way. And you've got this side covered also. Whereas if you're on this side at 9 o'clock, then it's a little harder if someone is falling in that direction to the right. And then when you're in this position, you really are right at the elbow. So it's not so difficult to just take the elbow and say, are you ready? Ready, begin. Take your step back. If you go to the first page of the walk, I think from what I've seen, people are doing very well laying out the walking course. We want to try to get this walk on as many people as possible. of all the tests we do, of all these kinds of performance tasks, the gait speed is really the most important. It's a remarkably predictive test as far as people becoming disabled and frail as they age. So we should be getting rates well over 90% in terms of finding the space to do the test. Going to the instructions on starting the walk, where you say, this is our walking course. I want you to walk to the other end of the course at your usual speed, just as if you were walking down the street to go to the store. And then we have the demo, and we say walk all the way past the other end of the tape before you stop. I will walk with you. Now, I've seen some people administering this who are saying that as they're walking the course, as they're doing the demo. But unfortunately, at the time, they're walking away from the participant. And many people have reduced hearing capacity and just don't hear it when it's said as you're walking away. So it's probably better to do the demo without saying anything, then come back and say this. Walk all the way past the other end of the tape before you stop, and you can even point that direction. I will walk with you. One of the important issues in timing here is that for the walk, we don't start the stopwatch until they actually begin to move. So if you say ready, begin, and they're just standing there, you don't start the stopwatch. You wait until they begin to move. Now this is different than the chair rise, where we actually start timing as soon as we say begin. Because in the chair rise, some people really have a hard time developing the power to start standing up, and we want to capture that. Whereas here, we really want the walking time itself. So you just have to kind of remember that for the walk, you wait until their foot begins to move. Now it's a bit of a challenge in terms of timing the end of the walk, turning the stopwatch off. As you know, we wait until one of their feet has actually crossed the line, is completely across the end line. Sometimes you don't know they're going to make it. You're walking beside them and you're watching their feet, and this foot is moving, and you say, is this foot going to clear the line or not clear the line? If it doesn't clear the line and lands on the line, you've got to wait for the next foot to go over the line before you turn the stopwatch off. And that can be pretty tricky business, because sometimes you're just guessing, especially if someone has stride lengths that are not quite consistent each time. So you do the best you can. You'll get better at this as you're doing it. Occasionally, and it happens to even very experienced people doing this test, you'll expect the foot to clear the line, and you'll be hitting that stopwatch, and it won't clear the line. And so you've actually ended the timing too soon. And what I tell people is when they clearly know that they've done the test wrong in terms of timing, it's okay. Now you don't have to say, oh my God, I really made a mistake doing this test. You just do it again. I mean, people are walking all the time, so it's not like we're wearing them out. We will never repeat the 5 chair stand test. It's too hard for people. But just a walk at the usual pace is fine to repeat. And it shouldn't happen very often, but there are occasional times when, through no fault of your own, you just get the timing wrong and you stop the stopwatch either too soon or too late. So just go about your business routinely and say, we're going to repeat this, and do it again, and then do the second one. Okay, a question came up earlier about holding the stopwatch during the walk, and the general recommendation, it's a right-handed world, and the recommendation is to hold the stopwatch in your right hand and to walk behind the person so that this hand with the stopwatch is behind them, and then you have your other hand available. It could, I agree with the person asking the question that it might be better if they were falling to that side away from you if you didn't have the stopwatch, although the few times I've ever had to catch someone, it wasn't really very hard with the stopwatch, because you're really kind of catching them in your arm, you're not catching them with your hand. The stopwatch could be held in your left hand if that's comfortable to you. In this right-handed world, these stopwatches are easier for right-handers to use than left-handers. The on-off switch, as you know, is right there for your thumb. So it's real easy to use the stopwatch with your right hand if you are right-handed. But if you decide that you really would like to do it the other way, there's no problem with that, just as long as you master the use of the stopwatch with your left hand. The position I showed you for the balance test, that's a good position. Kind of, you want to be, if you think of where people's range of vision is, you'd like to be behind their range of vision so that they're not seeing you.
Should we be more farther on the left-hand side or the right-hand side?
No, you want to be a little bit behind them and just a little bit to the side. And again, you can choose which side you want to be on. I typically will stay on their left-hand side, but it's not absolutely critical which side you're on. I think that the place you can get in trouble with the walk is if you pace them. If you're up and they can see you out of the side of their eye, many people will be kind of walking at the pace you're walking at, whereas you want to stay back and let them set the pace, let them walk at their natural pace. That's very important. In one of the training videos that we prepared, we actually had an artist create a glass plane at the finish line for the walk and showed the foot actually going through that plane. And basically you think of it as a plane that you have to completely break through. The foot has to completely pass through, and that's when you turn the stopwatch off. If the foot only gets part of the way through and then you stop, you have to wait for the other foot to go completely through the plane. So I think it's a nice image to have, this vertical plane right at the finish line. We ask people to fold their arms across their chest. It's amazing how many different ways people can find to fold their arms across their chest. Some people like to put them up high, and that's fine. Some people keep them across their chest, and that's fine also. What's not fine, I've seen people, when asked to put their arms across their chest, to have their arms across their belly, and that's too low. So they should be up fairly high. They want to have their hands up towards their shoulders. That's okay. I don't suggest people have their hands all the way up on top of their shoulders, but kind of in that direction is fine. Yeah. When doing the repeated chair stands, it's really important to emphasize that this should be done quickly. As you know, the walk test is done at usual pace, but the chair rise test, the repeated chair rise, should be done as quickly as possible. And you'll notice in the repeated chair stands that the first sentence has quickly not only underlined but in all caps. So that's about as much as they could do to remind you to really emphasize that word, as quickly, and you really should emphasize it as quickly as you can. And then in the demo, I think it's important to do the demo very quickly, even if it's clearly at a speed that's beyond what your participant could do. If you show them an example of it being done quickly, they will push themselves a little bit. If you're casual and taking your time, then that's exactly what they'll do. So we do want to encourage people to move through this test as quickly as they can. I think it's really important to remember to count the stands when you're doing the demo. Some people forget that. They're going to hear you counting when they do their test. When they see it in the demo, they understand that they're going to hear that counting. Now, the counting can be a little tricky too in terms of pacing people. You don't want to count ahead of when they're going to finish each stand, because that tends to pace them. You pretty much wait until they're already up and then say 1. And then when they're already up from the second one, then say 2, rather than doing it part of the way through the stand, because they're kind of in a way waiting for you to do that. Now, there are people who will struggle with this task, and because it's difficult, especially for people who have chronic diseases, who are frail. And in the demo we just saw here, it was done correctly. If someone stops or hesitates, you don't stop the test. but you ask them, can you continue? And many people will say yes, and it's okay if they take a short break. Don't turn your stopwatch off. Let it keep running. And many people will say yes, and then they'll start back into it again. And it's amazing. You see people who really you would bet for sure could never do 5 chair rises, and they do. They're successful. So don't assume that any one person is not going to be able to do those, and give them time to finish the chair rises. There are people who will struggle so much that they will have to stop during the test. Now you'll notice we don't ask for a time on the people who don't do 5 chair rises. And that's for a reason. It's because when someone is unable to finish the 5, it's really impossible to figure out where to stop the stopwatch, especially if they've stopped and you said, can you continue? And they think about it and then they try one more. We don't know where to stop the stopwatch. And so the main information is how many they were able to do. And then if people do 5, then the main information that we need is how long it took to do those 5. The spotting for the chair rise is very important. When I act as the frail older participant, if the person administering it to me is not standing in front of me, I always fall flat on my face. And then they never forget to stand in front of me when they do the test again. It's got a good impact when doing the demos. So when you're doing this with each other and practicing, it's okay to act like you're 85 and frail and have the person try to keep you safe during this test. We've, again, as I said, had not had serious adverse events, even though this is a fairly difficult test to do and people could fall during it. But with the chair against the wall and the person administering the chair rise standing right in front of the participant, there really isn't much place to go if you are standing there in front of them. So it can be a very safe test, and it has been.